There is something of a sad symmetry in the fact that the Holy Land is back in the news as we celebrate this holiday week here in the United States. Donald Trump has announced that the United States Embassy in Israel will be moved to Jerusalem, that he is recognizing Jerusalem as the Israeli capital, a move that has been widely condemned at the United Nations and worldwide. Here to discuss that with us now is Dr. James Zogby. Dr. Zogby is the founder and president of the Arab American Institute. He is also the author of the book Arab Voices, and he has been an active presence on the U.S. Scene for a number of years now. First of all, Dr. Zogby, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Secondly, what are we to make of this move by the Trump administration? Administrations for decades, I know, Republican and Democratic, have resisted calls to recognize Jerusalem as the Israeli capital. What do you make of it?
Well, it continues a pattern of behavior on the part of this president that is reckless and is bullying. It's a I'll do what I want to do, and I will and defy you to do anything about it. You know, his relationships with countries around the world have suffered as a result of this behavior. Jerusalem is a special one. It's not just the wall with Mexico or, you know, trashing NAFTA or whatever that, you know, has created some turmoil in this hemisphere. It is an issue of international law and of covenants and of the treatment of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who live as captives in what Israel has declared Greater Jerusalem. They live behind a wall, are denied full rights, and in a situation that has crippled their economy and their freedom of movement. It's disgraceful that the president has done this. I mean, nations around the world have recognized that Jerusalem is an issue that has to be solved in negotiations. He has defied that and acted as he does, as I said, impulsively, without regard for consequences. And did he do it to pay off a campaign debt? Did he do it to appease his religious right base? I don't know, but I do know that the consequences of this will be severe.
Well, you know, there may be people within the sound of our voice here in the United States who look at this and think, well, what difference does it make? It's Israel is Israel. If they want to pick Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, and if Trump wants to go along with it, you know, why is that a problem? You mentioned the human cost of people being displaced. What is the history there, just for folks who may not know?
The history, quite simply, is that in 1948, when the UN partitioned Palestine, and one can question their right to do that, but they did it. They left Jerusalem as an international zone. And they did so precisely because it was of consequence to three great religions. And they didn't want to create a situation that divided the city or that compromised the rights of one group at the expense of another. The old city of Jerusalem has a Jewish quarter, an Armenian quarter, a Muslim quarter, and a Christian quarter that has other groups other than the Armenians living in it. And so the idea of where you would draw a line if you divided it left the international community in a quandary. So they said international zone under an international protectorate. Well, in the 1948 war, Israel occupied up to the border what became West Jerusalem, and Jordan kept the rest. I mean, Jordan moved up to a certain line, and so there was this division between East and West Jerusalem. With the old city and the Haram Sharif, what Israelis call the Temple Mount, and what Muslims call the Noble Sanctuary, being on the Arab side. When Israel declared West Jerusalem its capital, no nation in the world accepted that because it was to be an international zone. And I might add that tens of thousands of Palestinians had property in this West Jerusalem and were refugees, people who were expelled from their homes. For example, the property on which the U.S. is supposed to be building its embassy is owned. They have the deeds to it. A partner of mine in this Arab American Institute. And they're in court right now trying to deal with the issue that the Israelis seized and the U.S. is now building on property that is owned by American citizens because their families had owned that property in 48. So it was a complicated question. In 67, Israel occupied the rest of Jerusalem and the rest of the West Bank, and then artificially a year later declared East Jerusalem part of a united Jerusalem and drew a border that was not just Jerusalem, but actually encompassed 28 villages in the West Bank. And they now call them Arab neighborhoods. They're not, they're independent villages, but they simply, it's as if, here in Washington, they simply drew a line around the Beltway and said, this is now Washington. And so all the little towns outside of Washington became Washington. And then several years later, they closed off this East Jerusalem so that Arabs inside it couldn't go out and Arabs outside couldn't come in. It crippled the economy. It put people at great risk because Jerusalem had always been the hub for Arabs. It had been the place where they went for hospital care, for university, for social and cultural events, for all their political institutions were headquartered there. And now all of a sudden it became Greater Jerusalem. And there's been a human cost, but there's also been a cost in terms of the violations of international law, which have said that East and West Jerusalem are actually both occupied and that should be resolved in negotiations between the two peoples. Israel shows no inclination to want to do that. Arabs have said they're willing to divide the city, and the Israelis are unwilling to consider that. They not only want West Jerusalem, they want East Jerusalem, and they want all the villages that are encompassed in this so-called Greater Jerusalem territory that they have designated.
So I think, one of the things that people you need to remember about this, but certainly let me know if you disagree, is that I also think people tend to think of this as a Jewish versus Muslim issue, but really we're talking about the three religions all having historical attachment to Jerusalem, the three Abrahamic religions. We're talking about property rights that are independent of religion, that include people, Palestinian Arabs of all faiths, or multiple faiths anyway, and non-religious Palestinians as well. We have economic issues of being cut off from a cultural center. We have social issues of discrimination, of people being treated differently based solely on their ethnic origin.
There is this too much emphasis on the spiritual Jerusalem, not enough on the temporal Jerusalem, and the reality of what the city means to people. It's as if, like I said, it's as if, using the Washington example again, it's as if you took Washington, D.C., and everything inside the Beltway, and declared it now annexed to Maryland. What does Virginia do? Where do they go to work? Where do they go to the various hospitals that are here? And everything that is part of the hub, you now become cut off from. That's what happened to Palestinians when Israel declared it Greater Jerusalem and shut the city off. People could no longer engage in the normal activity that had governed their lives for generations. Now, in addition to all of that, there's the issue of impunity. The world keeps saying it must be solved through negotiations. It's a violation of law. That's what this UN resolution was about that was voted on recently. But when the Israelis do it and get away with it and continue to get away with it, and the U.S. backs them up and Congress backs them up, it creates a sense of impunity and a sense that we can do whatever we want to do. We're going to get away with it, and so we might as well do more. And that's what's been going on, is that there is no restraint on Israeli bad behavior. and the Palestinians are simply asked to roll over and accept it, and that they have not done and will not do, and so we have this impossible standoff.
So what's the way out, James Zogby? I mean, here we are in a situation where you find a lot of Democrats as well as Republicans considering it off limits to somehow to criticize Israeli behavior. You have, I think we both supported Bernie Sanders last year. At least he was willing to talk about this issue in ways that I hadn't seen other Democratic presidential candidates do. But how do we get around this unwillingness to have an open conversation about this issue, and even in some cases attempts to make it illegal to talk about sanctions or whatever?
Look,
what do we do?
I think that if we just see this issue as Israelis versus Palestinians, we miss the point. It's actually Israel and the United States versus Palestinians and most of the rest of the world. Israelis criticize the UN, saying it's an automatic vote for the Palestinians. That's actually the world community is what they're talking about. The reality is that the U.S. Congress is an automatic vote for Israel. And it's mostly fear. It's mostly the myth of that they can be beaten in an election if they vote the wrong way or say the wrong thing or behave in a way unfriendly to Israel. And you not only have this sense of impunity then developing in Israel, but you also have this bizarre sense in Congress of hoop jumping, where the pro-Israel lobby will create new hoops for Congress to jump through so that, and they jump through it because they're afraid not to. So you will, the aid keeps going up. The new laws that like you just noted, criminalize supporting the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. Laws recognizing not just Jerusalem as the capital, but threatening sanctions against the United Nations if they do anything pro-Palestinian. I mean, it is, and you get, Nikki Haley's comments yesterday that we're taking names and we give you aid and we'll punish you if you don't. I mean, the U.S. has become politics here have become so distorted on this question that I believe that we simply can't play a role in peacemaking. The question is who can, and I don't think that there's anyone willing to step up to the plate right now and challenge the United States. And so I basically think that we've come to the name of your show, the 0 hour. We've come to the point where we used to say for years, we're 5 minutes before midnight, and if we don't act now, there'll never be a two-state solution. I think we're there. I mean, I think in all reality, to be realistic about this, we have to say that there is not going to be an Israeli government that we can imagine in our lifetimes that's going to be willing to give up the West Bank and make a deal that the Palestinians can live with. There's also not going to be a United States government that we can imagine that is going to be willing and able to pressure Israel to do that. And I think the distortions that have occurred on the Palestinian side, living under occupation now for 50 years, has created a situation where they are simply not a functioning political movement. They've become a dependency. They need the international aid because the largest employer in the West Bank has now become the Palestinian Authority because they can't grow an economy. Israel won't let them import, export, or develop an independent economy. So they've become a dependency. And so given all of that, I think what we're left with is a one-state solution. The Israelis, in a rather racist way, say, oh, no, we can't do that. It won't be a Jewish state. We'll have too many Arabs here. But, one might say, screw you. You created this nightmare for the Palestinians, and you're going to have to live with it. You're unwilling to sever yourself and give them a viable, independent state in the land you occupied in '67. And so don't whine about the fact that, as they, again, using the racist terminology that they use, there's this demographic time bomb of too many Palestinian babies being born, 350 or 400 a day, that are going to, transform the country into an Arab majority country. That's the reality they created. And frankly, one man, one vote is not a bad situation. I think it's where we ought to be. It'll be generations before we get there. But again, this is the situation that Israel made for itself. It's the situation that the United States enabled. And that's what we've got right now. I just don't see a way forward. No one is willing to do what would be needed in order to have a two-state solution.
Well, thank you so much for your perspective on this. I think it's such an important issue and one that doesn't get covered enough even by the progressive media in the United States. So thanks for coming on the show and talking about it. Where can people go to find out more about your work and what you're doing?
Well, they can go to aaiusa.org. They can follow me on Twitter at JJZ1600. And we've got plenty of stuff to show. We'd be more than happy to provide information. They can write to us too. They can write to me at jzogby at aaiusa.org. And just one little correction: you said Bernie Sanders was the first to have raised these issues. He did, and I was thrilled at his courage and at his wisdom. But Jesse Jackson raised these issues back in the 80s. And that was the first time we ever had a platform fight at a Democratic convention on the issue of Palestine. We did it in 1968. It was a coalition of Arab American and Jewish American Democrats who brought it to the forefront, and Jesse backed us up. It was great.
Well, thanks
so much for having me.
Thanks for reminding me of that. I appreciate that. And James Zogby, I appreciate you coming on the program. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.